Jeremiah chapter 33, verse 3, in the New International Version declares, "Call to me, and I will answer you and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know." Read that again if you need to. I'll wait. That's the verse we're starting with today. And the theme for our time together is simple. God will do more than you imagine. Not more than you ask, more than you imagine. There's a difference, and we'll get to that. But first, let's just sit with this verse from Jeremiah. This verse comes from a letter God gave to Jeremiah. Jeremiah was in confinement at the time, not free to move around. His situation looked stuck, and in the middle of that stuck season, this word came to him. "Call to me," God said. Not call to your circumstances. Not call to your memory of how things used to be. Call to me. That's the starting instruction. Before anything else happens in this verse, there's an invitation to call. It's worded as a command, but it reads like an open door. God is saying, "I'm available, and I want you to reach out." A lot of us treat prayer like a last resort. We try everything else first, and then we pray when we're out of options. This verse puts calling on God first, not last. Then comes the promise, "I will answer you." Not "I might answer you." Not "I'll consider it." "I will answer you." That's a direct response tied to a direct action. You call. He answers. It doesn't say when. It doesn't say how. It just says that an answer is coming. And then the verse goes further, "and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know." This is the part I want us to slow down on. Great and unsearchable things. The word unsearchable means things you couldn't find on your own, no matter how hard you looked. Not because you're not smart enough, not because you didn't try hard enough, but because they're simply outside what you currently have access to. You do not know them yet. That phrase, "you do not know," is important. It means there are things about your life, your future, your situation that haven't been revealed to you. Not because God is hiding them out of spite, but because some things are only given when you ask, and some things are only understood when the time is right. I think a lot of us live like we've already seen the full picture. We make decisions based on what we currently know, and we settle into conclusions based on what we currently see. But this verse is telling us that there's more than what's currently in front of you, more than what your current information allows you to plan for. God is saying, "There are things I want to tell you that you have not figured out yet, and you won't figure them out by thinking harder. You'll receive them by calling." This is why the order in this verse matters so much. Calling comes first. Answering comes second. Revealing comes third. You don't get the great and unsearchable things by sitting and waiting passively. You get them by calling, and then staying in a posture where you can receive what comes back. I want to be honest with you. I've had seasons where I called and felt like nothing happened. No answer that I could see. No new information. Just quiet. And I've learned that quiet isn't the same as absence. Sometimes the answer is being put together while you're still in the calling phase. You don't always see the construction happening. You just see the finished result later. So if you're in a season where you've been calling and it feels quiet, this verse isn't telling you that you did something wrong. It's telling you that there are things being prepared that you do not currently know. That word "unsearchable" should actually bring you some relief. It means you're not supposed to have figured this out yet. You're not failing by not knowing. You're simply in the part of the process where the not knowing is normal. The verse doesn't say, "Call to me, and I'll confirm what you already suspected." It says, "Call to me, and I'll tell you what you do not know." That means the answer might look different than what you expected. It might be bigger. It might come from a direction you weren't watching. I also want to take a moment on the word "great," since we've spent most of our time so far on the word "unsearchable." Great here is describing the size of what's coming. Not great in the sense of merely pleasant or nice. Great in the sense of significant, weighty, the kind of thing that actually changes your situation in a noticeable way. A lot of us, without really meaning to, start praying smaller prayers over time. We get used to disappointment, or we get cautious after things haven't worked out the way we hoped, and our requests start to shrink to match our expectations. This verse doesn't shrink to match anyone's expectations. It says great things paired with unsearchable things, things you don't currently know. That combination is worth sitting with for a second. Not small things you can already picture, but great things you haven't even thought to picture yet. This is the foundation for everything else we're going to look at today. God's response to your calling is not limited to your current understanding. It goes beyond it. That's our starting point. I want to add one more thing before we move on, because people often ask me what calling actually looks like in practice. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be formal. It can be a few honest sentences before you get out of bed, or a quiet moment in the car before you walk into work. The verse doesn't measure the call by length. It just says call. Some of the most sincere praying I've ever done has been short. A few words, said plainly, without trying to sound a certain way. I used to think I needed the right phrases to get God's attention. I don't think that anymore. This verse doesn't say, call to me with the right words. It just says, call to me. So if you've been holding back from praying about something because you don't know how to say it properly, that's not a requirement here. You can say it plainly. You can even say it messy. The instruction is to call, not to perform. Let's hold on to that as we move into the next verse. So we've established something already. When you call, God answers. And what he shows you can be things you currently have no way of knowing. That naturally raises a question. If his answers go beyond what I currently know, can I even picture what he's going to do? That's where our next verse comes in. It's found in Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 5. This verse deals directly with the limits of human understanding, and it sets up the rest of our time today. Let's read it. As you do not know the path of the wind, or how a body is formed in a mother's womb, so you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. That's Ecclesiastes 11 verse 5, New International Version. This verse compares two things that are easy to observe but impossible to fully track. The first is the path of the wind. You can feel wind on your face. You can watch leaves move. You can hear it rattle a window. But can you trace exactly where it started, and exactly where it's headed, and why it shifted direction at the exact moment it did? Most of us can't. We can describe what the wind is doing right now, but the full path, from start to finish, isn't something we can map out. The second example is how a body is formed in a mother's womb. This is something that happens constantly, all over the world, every single day. And yet the actual process, the cell division, the formation of organs, the timing of every system coming online, is something far beyond simple observation. Doctors can describe stages. Science can explain mechanisms. But the full picture of how a single life comes together, piece by piece, in hidden development, still carries mystery in it. Both examples have something in common. They're real, they're happening, but they're not fully understandable, even when you're looking right at the results. Then the verse draws the comparison. So you cannot understand the work of God, the maker of all things. The word work here is important. It's not just talking about God's existence or his nature in a general sense. It's talking about his work, meaning what he's actively doing in your life, in your situation, in the things you've been praying about. This verse is saying that God's work follows the same pattern as the wind and the womb. It's real. It's happening. But you're not going to be able to fully track or understand the process while it's unfolding. I think this is one of the most freeing verses in the Bible, honestly, because it takes the pressure off of needing to understand everything before you can trust it. We like to understand things. It makes us feel like we're in control. When we don't understand something, we tend to assume it isn't working, or it isn't happening at all. But this verse pushes back on that assumption directly. Not understanding the process doesn't mean nothing is happening. It just means you're not the one doing the building. I want to share something from my own life here. A few years ago, I was waiting on something that mattered a lot to me, and the waiting stretched on far longer than I expected. I remember trying to figure out why things weren't moving. I'd go over every detail, every conversation, every possible reason things were delayed. I was trying to trace the wind, basically. Trying to map something that wasn't mine to map. And the more I tried to figure it out, the more frustrated I got, because I genuinely couldn't see the mechanics behind what was happening. It wasn't until much later, once things had actually come together, that I understood pieces of it. Some of it I still don't fully understand, if I'm honest. But what I noticed is that the not knowing didn't stop the work from happening. The work was happening whether I could trace it or not. That's what this verse is teaching us. You don't need to understand the formation process to trust that something is being formed. A mother doesn't need to understand cellular biology for a baby to develop correctly. The process continues, whether she understands it or not. In the same way, God's work in your life continues, whether you can trace it or not. I think a lot of unnecessary stress comes from trying to do something we were never equipped to do, which is track the invisible process of how God is working things out. We weren't given that job. We were given the job of calling, like we read in Jeremiah, and trusting, like we're reading here in Ecclesiastes. The tracking and the timing belong to Him. There's also something worth noticing in how this verse ends. The maker of all things. Not just the maker of some things, or the maker of the easy things. All things. That phrase covers the situation you're currently facing, even if it feels complicated or specific or unusual. If He's the maker of all things, then whatever you're walking through falls inside the category of things He's actively forming. You don't need a separate verse for your specific situation. This one already covers it. So if you're in a season where you don't understand what's happening, where you've tried to trace the path of your circumstances, and you keep coming up empty, this verse is giving you permission to stop tracing. Not because the situation doesn't matter, but because tracing it was never going to give you the full picture anyway. The wind moves, whether you trace it or not. The body forms, whether you trace it or not. And God's work continues, whether you trace it or not. I think it also helps to remember that a mother carrying a child doesn't spend each day demanding to see the baby's organs forming. She goes about her life, she eats, she rests, she prepares the room, and she trusts that the process happening inside her is continuing on its own timeline. She has checkups along the way. Sure, moments where she gets a small glimpse, but she's not staring at her own body every hour, trying to verify that growth is happening. That kind of constant checking would exhaust her, and it wouldn't actually speed anything up. I think this is a fair picture of what waiting on God is supposed to look like too. You can have your moments of checking in, your moments of asking how things are going, but the day-to-day posture isn't supposed to be constant verification. It's supposed to be living your life, doing what's in front of you, while something continues forming that you don't need to supervise every hour. This takes real practice for a lot of us. I know it's taken practice for me. Patience isn't really about waiting quietly until you feel like waiting is over. It's closer to living normally, while something you can't see continues to take shape. We've looked at 2 verses now. Jeremiah told us that when we call, God answers with things we currently don't know. Ecclesiastes told us that His work happens in ways we can't fully track, the same way wind and the forming of a body are happening even though we can't observe every detail. Now I want to bring in a 3rd verse, one that tells us something about the scale of what God does. It's found in Job chapter 5, verse 9. He performs wonders that cannot be fathomed, miracles that cannot be counted. This verse comes from a conversation involving a man named Eliphaz, speaking about God's nature. I'm not going to walk through the whole conversation, because the verse itself stands on its own. He performs wonders that cannot be fathomed, miracles that cannot be counted. 2 phrases here, and they're doing different work. The first is wonders that cannot be fathomed. Fathom is a word about depth. To fathom something means to get to the bottom of it, to fully grasp how deep it goes. So this phrase is saying that what God does has a depth to it that can't be fully measured or reached. You can experience the wonder. You can benefit from it. But getting to the complete bottom of how deep it goes isn't something you'll manage. The second phrase is miracles that cannot be counted. This one is about quantity, not depth. Counting is something we do naturally. We count blessings. We count answered prayers. We count the things we're grateful for. And counting is good. But this verse is telling us that what God does goes past the number we'd land on if we tried to count it. Think about what that actually means for a moment. If you sat down and wrote out a list of everything you're believing God for, that list would have a number attached to it. Maybe it's 3 things. Maybe it's 10. Whatever the number is, this verse says his miracles go past being counted. Meaning whatever number you land on with your list, the actual scope of what he does is larger than that number. This is where the theme for today connects directly. God will do more than you imagine. Your imagination, even at its biggest, tends to work like a list. You picture specific outcomes, specific timelines, specific results. And there's nothing wrong with that. Having a picture in mind is part of believing for something. But this verse is telling us that what actually happens often goes past the picture. Not because the picture was wrong, but because the picture was always going to be smaller than the reality. A list has an end. You can count to the end of a list. This verse says these miracles cannot be counted, meaning there's no end you'll reach by listing them out. I think about this in terms of my own prayers sometimes. There was a stretch of time where I was praying for one specific thing. Just one. I had it narrowed down clearly in my mind. Exactly what I wanted it to look like. Exactly when I wanted it to happen. And when the answer eventually came, it didn't look like the narrow version I had pictured. It came with more attached to it than I had asked for. Things connected to it that I hadn't even thought to ask about showed up alongside it. At the time, it actually threw me off a little because it wasn't what I had mentally prepared for. I had prepared for one outcome, and what came was wider than that outcome. Looking back, I think that's a small picture of what this verse is describing. Wonders that cannot be fathomed, because I couldn't have planned for the depth of what actually happened. Miracles that cannot be counted, because what showed up didn't fit neatly into the single thing I had been counting on. I want to be careful here because this isn't about telling you to stop being specific in your prayers. Specific prayer is good. Jeremiah told us to call, and calling involves naming things. But what Job 5 verse 9 is adding is that your specific prayer is the starting point, not the ceiling. You call with a specific request. He answers, often, with something wider than the request. This is also why comparing your situation to someone else's doesn't really work. If miracles can't be counted, then there's no fixed amount being distributed, where your portion depends on what's left over. The math doesn't work like that. This isn't a countable pool, where more for someone else means less for you. It's described as uncountable on purpose. I also want to point out the word performs. He performs wonders. That's active language. Not he performed once in the past, and now we just remember it. Performs is closer to an ongoing description, something that characterizes how he operates. So when you're in a season of waiting, and you're tempted to think that the uncountable miracles were for a different time period or a different group of people, this verse doesn't support that thinking. It describes him as someone who performs wonders, present tense, not someone who used to. So here's where I want to land this section. If you've been praying with a list, that's not a problem. Keep your list, but hold it loosely enough to be surprised. Because the verse we just read says what's coming goes past being fathomed and past being counted. Your list was never meant to be the limit. I want to mention something else here, because it connects to how we usually talk about blessings. We're often taught to count our blessings, and that's a good practice. Naming what you're grateful for, one by one, keeps your heart in a healthy place. But I think it's worth noticing that even that practice has a limit built into it, because counting requires stopping at some point. You make a list, you finish the list, and then you move on with your day. This verse is describing something that doesn't stop at the place where your list ends. Ends So gratitude and this verse aren't in conflict with each other. Keep counting your blessings. Keep naming what you're thankful for. Just hold in mind that the verse is telling you the actual total goes past wherever your counting stops. You're not being ungrateful by acknowledging that there's more than what you've already counted. You're simply agreeing with what this verse already says about how he operates. I find that thought settling, honestly, especially on days when my list feels short or my situation feels small compared to what I'm believing for. The size of my current list was never the full measure of what's actually available. Let's bring these 3 verses together for a moment. Jeremiah told us to call and promise that the answer includes things we currently don't know. Ecclesiastes told us that the process of his work is like the wind or the forming of a body, real but untraceable while it's happening. Job told us that the result, when it comes, goes past what we could fathom or count. Put together, these 3 verses cover the whole arc of how this works. You call, the process unfolds in a way you can't fully track, and what comes out the other side is bigger than what you pictured going in. I want to talk briefly about what this means practically, because I don't want this to just stay as an idea. The first practical piece is this: keep calling, not once, and not only when things feel urgent, ongoing, regular, simple calling. You don't need elaborate words for this. You just need to actually do it, consistently. The second practical piece is to loosen your grip on needing to understand the process. This is hard for a lot of us, myself included. We want explanations. We want timelines. We want to know why something is taking the shape it's taking. But based on what we read in Ecclesiastes, that kind of full understanding isn't typically available while things are still forming. You can ask for peace in the not knowing. That's a fair prayer. But asking to fully understand the mechanism before it's finished is asking for something that isn't usually given. The third practical piece connects to Job. Hold your specific prayers, but expect the answer to potentially be wider than your specific prayer. This protects you from 2 things. It protects you from disappointment when the answer doesn't look exactly like your mental picture. And it protects you from missing the answer because you were only looking for the narrow version you had planned. I also want to address something that tends to come up around this topic, which is overthinking. A lot of us spend real energy turning a situation over and over, trying to predict outcomes, trying to prepare for every version of how something could go. Based on what we've read today, that effort is largely spent trying to do a job that was never ours to do. The tracing of the wind isn't your job. The mapping of the formation process isn't your job. The counting of the miracles isn't possible to begin with. Your part is the calling and the trusting and the showing up consistently in both. That's a smaller job than the one most of us are trying to carry, and I think recognizing that can actually bring a lot of relief. I'm not saying this to suggest that waiting is easy. Waiting is genuinely hard, especially when you don't have a timeline. But these 3 verses give you something to stand on while you wait. Something is happening that you don't currently know. That something is forming in a way you can't trace. And what it forms into will go past what you could fathom or count. I think it's also worth saying that this applies across every area of life, not just one category of prayer. Maybe what you're believing for has to do with your health. Maybe it has to do with your finances, or your family, or a relationship that feels strained right now. Maybe it's about a decision you can't see your way through yet. These verses weren't written for a narrow category of requests. They describe how God works in general, which means they apply to whatever you personally brought into this teaching today. You don't need to qualify your situation as big enough or important enough for these verses to count. If you're in the middle of a process you can't trace, then these verses are already describing your situation, whatever it happens to be. There's one more practical point I want to add before we close out the teaching part of today. While you wait, it helps to keep your hands busy with whatever is actually in front of you. Not as a distraction, but because waiting well usually involves continuing to live, continuing to work, continuing to show up for the people around you. A mother doesn't stop living her life while a child forms. She keeps working, keeps preparing, keeps showing up to her normal responsibilities. The forming happens in the background, while life continues in the foreground. I think that's a healthy pattern for us too. Keep showing up to your responsibilities. Keep doing the next right thing in front of you. Let the calling, the trusting, and the waiting happen alongside your normal life, not as a replacement for it. One more thing I want to mention here, because it's easy to overlook. Trusting in a season like this is usually a decision more than a feeling. There will be days when you feel settled about whatever you're waiting on, and there will be days when you don't feel settled at all. Both kinds of days are normal. The trust we're talking about today isn't about manufacturing a constant feeling of peace. It's about continuing to call, continuing to release the need to trace everything, and continuing to expect more than you can currently picture, regardless of which kind of day it is. Feelings will shift around. That's just how feelings work. But the decision to keep calling can stay steady, even while the feelings move up and down. Before we pray, I want to leave you with one more thought. The theme today wasn't God might do more than you imagine. It was God will do more than you imagine. That word will is a settled word. It's a description of how he consistently operates, based on what we've read in these 3 passages today. So if you walked into this teaching carrying something heavy, something you've been praying about for a while, something that feels stuck or unclear right now, I want you to take these 3 verses with you. Call to him and expect an answer that includes things you don't currently know. Let the process unfold without needing to trace every part of it. And get ready for the outcome to be wider than what you originally pictured. That's simply what these 3 passages read together are describing. Let's pray over this together now. Father, thank you for this time today. Thank you for your word and for the chance to sit with it slowly instead of rushing through it. I bring every person watching this right now before you. You know what each one is carrying, even the parts they haven't said out loud to anyone. Lord, for the one who has been calling out to you for a long time and feels like the answer hasn't come, I ask that you would remind them today that calling is never wasted. You said you would answer, and I trust your word over what the waiting feels like. Show each person here things they do not currently know, things that are great, things that are beyond what their current understanding can reach. For the one who has been trying to trace every detail of their situation, trying to figure out why things are taking the shape they're taking, I ask that you would give them rest from that effort. Let them release the tracing, the way we can't trace the wind or fully understand how a body forms. Let them trust the process even without seeing the mechanics of it. Father, for the one who has a specific prayer, a specific request they've been carrying, I ask that you would meet them with wonders that cannot be fathomed and miracles that cannot be counted. Let what you do go past their list. Let it surprise them in a good way. Let it be wider than what they prepared for. I pray against the overthinking that keeps so many of us stuck in our heads instead of resting in you. Quiet that pattern right now in everyone watching. Replace it with simple trust, the kind that doesn't need every answer in advance. For anyone who has been discouraged, who has started to wonder if their prayers are even being heard, I ask that you would meet them with reassurance today. Not through a dramatic sign necessarily, but through a settled peace that lets them keep calling. For anyone carrying a health concern right now, I ask for your hand over their body, and for wisdom for every doctor and every decision connected to their care. For anyone worried about provision, about bills or work, or the uncertainty of income, I ask that you would open a way that they haven't been able to see yet. For anyone struggling in a relationship that feels strained or distant, I ask that you would soften what needs to be softened and bring clarity where it's needed. Lord, do what only you can do in every situation represented by the person watching this right now. Whatever they're facing, whatever they've been praying about, I ask that you would move in it, even in ways they haven't thought to ask for. Thank you that your work doesn't stop at what we can imagine. Thank you that it goes further than that. We trust you with the timing, and we trust you with the process, even the parts we can't see. In Jesus' name, amen. My friends, if this teaching meant something to you today, I want to ask you for something simple. Take a second and like this video. It genuinely helps this ministry reach more people who need to hear this. If you know someone who's in a season of waiting right now, someone who needs to hear that God will do more than they imagine, go ahead and share this with them. It might be exactly what they need today, even if they never tell you that directly. And if you want to support what we're doing here, sharing and engaging with these videos is one of the simplest ways to do that. This ministry only continues to grow because people like you are willing to pass it along. Every like, every share, every comment helps this message reach someone who might be in the exact season we talked about today. So thank you genuinely for being here and for taking the time to support this work. Before you go, I want you to comment one declaration below. Type out, "God is doing more than I can imagine." Let that be your declaration for today. Let it remind you, every time you scroll back to it, what you're standing on. I'll close with this. Whatever you walked in here carrying today, it's still in His hands. Keep calling, the way Jeremiah described. Let the process unfold without needing to trace it, the way Ecclesiastes described. And get ready to be surprised by something wider than you pictured, the way Job described. Thank you again for spending this time with me today. I'll see you in the next one.